François-Noël Babeuf, known as Gracchus Babeuf, was a French political agitator and journalist of the French Revolutionary period. His newspaper Le Tribun du Peuple was best known for his advocacy for the poor and calling for a popular revolt against the Directory, the government of France. He was a leading advocate for democracy, the abolition of private property and the equality of results. He angered the authorities who were clamping down hard on the radical enemies. In spite of the efforts of his Jacobin friends to save him, Babeuf was executed for his role in the conspiracy of the equals. The Gracchus nickname likened him to the ancient Roman tribunes of the people. Although the words anarchist and communist did not exist in Babeuf's lifetime, they have both been used to describe his ideas by later scholars. The word communism was first used in English by Goodwin Barmby in a conversation with those he described as the disciples of Babeuf. He has been called the first revolutionary communist. Early life. Babeuf was born at St. Nicaise near the town of St. Quentin. His father, Claude Babeuf, had deserted the French Royal Army in 1738 for that of Maria Theresa of Austria, reportedly rising to the rank of major. Amnestied in 1755, he returned to France, but soon sank into poverty, and had to work as a casual laborer to support his wife and family. The hardships endured by Babeuf during his early years contributed to the development of his political opinions. His father gave him a basic education, but until the outbreak of the Revolution, he was a domestic servant, and from 1785 occupied the office of commissariat, assisting the nobles and priests in the assertion of the feudal rights over the peasants. Accused of abandoning the feudal aristocracy, he would later say that the son of the French Revolution had brought him to view his mother, the feudal system, as a hydra with 100 heads. Revolutionary activities. Babeuf was working for a land surveyor at Roye when the revolution began. His father had died in 1780, and he now had to provide for his wife and 2 children, as well as for his mother, brothers and sisters. He was a prolific writer, and the signs of his future socialism are contained in a letter of the 21st of March 1787, one of a series mainly on literature and addressed to the Secretary of the Academy of Paris. In 1789 he drew up the first article of the Cahier of the electors of the bailliage of Roye, demanding the abolition of feudal rights. From July to October 1789, he lived in Paris, superintending the publication of his first work, Cadastre perpétuel dédié à l'Assemblée nationale, LAN 1789 et la première de la liberté française, which was written in 1789 and issued in 1790. The same year he published a pamphlet against feudal aids and the gabelle, for which he was denounced and arrested, but provisionally released. Propaganda work. In October, on his return to Roye, he founded the Correspondant Picard, a political journal that would have 40 issues. Babeuf used his journal to agitate for a progressive taxation system, and condemned the census suffrage planned for the 1791 elections to the Legislative Assembly, in which citizen votes would be weighted by their social standing. Due to his political activities, he was arrested on the 19th of May 1790, but released in July before the fête de la Fédération, thanks to pressure exerted nationally by Jean-Paul Marat. In November, Babeuf was elected a member of the municipality of Roye, but was expelled. In March 1791, Babeuf was appointed commissioner to report on the national property in the town, and in September 1792 was elected a member of the Council General of the Département of the Somme, a rivalry with the principal administrator and later deputy to the convention, André Dumont. forced Babeuf to transfer to the post of administrator of the district of Montdidier, where he was accused of fraud for having altered a name in a deed of transfer of national lands. The error was probably due to negligence, but, distrusting the impartiality of the judges of the Somme, he fled to Paris, and on the 23rd of August 1793 was sentenced in contumaciam to 20 years' imprisonment. Meanwhile, he had been appointed secretary to the Relief Committee of the Paris Commune. The judges of Amiens pursued him with a warrant for his arrest, which took place in Brumaire of the year 2. The Court of Cassation quashed the sentence, through defective form, and sent Babeuf for a new trial before the Ain tribunal, which acquitted him on the 18th of July 1794, only days before the Thermidorian reaction. Babeuf returned to Paris, and on the 3rd of September 1794 published the first issue of his journal de la Liberté de la Presse, whose title was changed on the 5th of October 1794 to Le Tribun du Peuple. The execution of Maximilien Robespierre on the 28th of July 1794 had ended the Reign of Terror and begun the White Terror. Babeuf, now self-styled Gracchus Babeuf, defended the fallen terror politicians with the stated goal of achieving equality in fact, and not only by proclamation. However, about the terror, he said, "I object to this particular aspect of the system." Babeuf attacked the leaders of the Thermidorian reaction and, from a socialist point of view, the economic outcome of the revolution. He also argued for the inclusion of women into the political clubs. This was an attitude which had few supporters, even in the Jacobin Club, and in October Babeuf was arrested and imprisoned at Arras. Here he was influenced by political prisoners, notably Philippe Buonarroti, Simon Duplay, and R. Lebois, editor of the Journal de l'Égalité and afterwards of the L'Ami du Peuple papers of Leclerc, which carried on the traditions of Jean-Paul Marat. Babeuf emerged from prison a confirmed advocate of revolution and convinced that his project, fully proclaimed to the world in issue 33 of his Tribune, could only come about through the restoration of the Constitution of 1793. That Constitution had been ratified by a national referendum by universal male suffrage but never implemented. In February 1795, Babeuf was arrested again, and the Tribune du Peuple was solemnly burnt in the Tête des Burgers by the Jeunesse Dorée, young men whose mission was to root out Jacobinism. Babeuf might have faded into obscurity like other agitators, but for the appalling economic conditions caused by the fall in the value of assignats, Société des Égaux. The attempts of the Directory to deal with the economic crisis gave Babeuf his historical importance. The new government wanted to abolish the system which benefited Paris at the expense of all France. To this goal, the government planned to abolish the sale of bread and meat at nominal prices. On the 20th of February 1796, the announcement caused widespread consternation. Workers and the large class of proletarians attracted to Paris by the system, as well as rentiers and government officials, whose incomes were paid in assignats arbitrarily set by the government, felt threatened to starve. The government yielded to the outcry, and tried to mitigate the problem by dividing people entitled to relief into classes. But this only increased alarm and discontent. The universal misery gave point to Babeuf's virulent attacks of the existing order, and gained him a hearing. He gained a small circle of followers known as the Société des Égaux, soon merged with the rump of the Jacobin Club, who met at the Panthéon. In November 1795, police reported that Babeuf was openly preaching insurrection, revolt and the Constitution of 1793. The group was influenced by Sylvain Maréchal, the author of Le Manifeste des Égaux and a sympathizer of Babeuf. For a time, the government left Babeuf alone but observed his activities. The Directory benefited from the socialist agitation because it counteracted royalist movements for overthrowing the Directory. Most workers, even of extreme views, were repelled by Babeuf's bloodthirstiness, and police reported that his agitation increased support for the government. The Jacobin Club refused to admit Babeuf and Lebois on the ground that they were throat cutters. However, the economic crisis increased Babeuf's influence. After Napoleon Bonaparte closed the Club of the Panthéon on the 27th of February 1796, Babeuf increased his activity. In Ventos and Germinal under the pseudonym Lalande, Soldat de la Patrie, Babeuf published the paper Scout of the People, or Defender of 25 Million Oppressed, which was passed from group to group secretly in the streets of Paris. At the same time, issue 40 of Babeuf's Tribune caused immense sensation as it praised the authors of the September massacres as deserving well of the country, and declared that a more complete the 2nd of September was needed to destroy the government, which consisted of starvers, bloodsuckers, tyrants, hangmen, rogues and mountebanks. Distress among all classes continued. In March the Directory tried to replace assignats by a new issue of mandats, and this raised hopes, but they were soon dashed. A rumor that national bankruptcy had been declared caused thousands of the lower class of workers to rally to Babeuf's ideas. On the 4th of April 1796, the government received a report that 500,000 Parisians needed relief. For the 11th of April, Paris was placarded with posters headed "Analysis of Babeuf's Teaching, tribun.du peuple," which began with the sentence, "Nature has given to every man the right to the enjoyment of an equal share in all property," and ended with a call to restore the Constitution of 1793. Arrest and execution. Babeuf's song, "Dying of Hunger, Dying of Cold," set to a popular tune, began to be sung in café, with immense applause. Reports circulated that the disaffected troops of the French Revolutionary Army in the camp of Grenelle were ready to join an insurrection against the government. The Bureau Central had accumulated through its agents evidence of a conspiracy for an armed uprising fixed for Floréal 22, year IV, in which involved Jacobins and Socialists. The Directory thought it time to react. On the 10th of May, Babeuf, who had taken the pseudonym Tisset, was arrested. Many of his associates were gathered by the police on order from Lazare Carnot. Among them were Augustin Alexandre Dardet and Philippe Buonarroti, the ex-members of the National Convention, Robert Lindet, Jean-Pierre-André Aymar, Marc-Guillaume Alexis Vadia and Jean-Baptiste Drouet, famous as the postmaster of Saint-Ménehould, who had arrested Louis XVI during the latter's flight to Varennes, and now a member of the Directory's Council of 500. The government crackdown was extremely successful. The last issue of the Tribune appeared on the 24th of April, although Lebois in the Ami du Peuple tried to incite the soldiers to revolt, and for a while there were rumors of a military uprising. Babeuf and his accomplices were to be tried at the newly created High Court at Vendôme. When the prisoners were removed from Paris on Fructidor 10 and 11, there were tentative efforts at a riot hoping to rescue the prisoners, but these were easily suppressed. On the 7th of September 1796, 500 or 600 Jacobins tried to rouse the soldiers at Grenelle but also failed. The trial was at Vendôme from the 20th of February 1797 for 2 months. Although more important people were involved in the conspiracy, the government depicted Babeuf as the leader. His own vanity played into the hands. On Prairial 7, Babeuf and others were condemned them to death. Some of the prisoners, including Buonarroti, were deported. The rest, including Vadia and his fellow conventionals, were acquitted. Drouet managed to escape, according to Paul Barris, with the connivance of the Directory. Babeuf and Dardet were guillotined the next day at Vendôme, Prairial 8, without appeal. Babeuf's body was transported and buried in a mass grave in the Vendôme's old cemetery of the Grand Faubourg, in Loire-et-Cher. Society must be made to operate in such a way that it eradicates once and for all the desire of a man to become richer, or wiser, or more powerful than others. The French Revolution was nothing but a precursor of another revolution, one that will be bigger, more solemn, and which will be the last.